August 2, 2020 will forever be etched in the memories of Guyanese people all across our country and even those in the diaspora, as it was the day that democracy prevailed and His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali was sworn in as President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Some might argue that we continue to talk about the months of protracted delay to the election results and wonder why in 2024 we still have these discussions about democracy and what transpired during that 5 month period. Joining me in studio at this time to have this conversation is Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, Honorable Gail Teixeira, Minister of Public Works, Honorable Bishop Juan Edghill, and Minister within the Ministry of Public Works, Honorable Deodat Indar, as we continue to discuss democracy and the fight towards democracy prevailing in our country. Thank you all for taking time out to be here as we have this discussion and as we commemorate as well the 4th year anniversary of the Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali led government. I want us to first start this discussion by really going back to 2020, understanding what transpired during that time. It was a glaring attempt to subvert the will of the people. It was there, it was televised, it is etched in our minds, like I referenced earlier, and it is there for posterity in terms of history, documents, clips, videos, everything. So we could start with you, Minister Teixeira, as we recount these events.
Well, to go a little bit earlier than that, the 2020 March elections, there were signs before that the government of the day, Mr. Granger, would not adhere to constitutional rule of law. He has the reputation, he has garnered the reputation as the only head of state in the Caribbean who had the largest number of cases against him for executive lawlessness in the courts of not only Guyana but our apex court, the CCJ. The fact that when he disobeyed the Constitution, violated in relation to the appointment of Patterson as the chairman of GCOM, was clearly an attempt to control GCOM and what would happen in it. And so there were indicators all along that they were not going to. The whole issue of the no confidence vote, which made it very clear that passed the parliament that elections were to be held in 3 months. 14 months later is when the elections are held, and then 5 months after that, then the declaration of the results. So there were indications that the APNU under Mr. Granger wanted to stay in government, and that was it. And if they could violate the Constitution of Guyana, violate the rights of Guyanese people, they would do so. And so the anniversary of August 2nd is really a testimony to our people, the leadership of the People's Progressive Party, who, in that time, Guyana could have gone a different way in those period between March and August. In many other countries, it would have led to all sorts of terrible violence and stuff like that. Because the PPP Civic was in control and in the leadership, it was able to manage in a very principled way and to help our people to pace themselves, to have trust that we would win at the end. And of course, we were supported by a number of civil society bodies in Guyana and of course internationally. So this secondly isn't only about government and our government. It is a testimony to our people, who majority of whom wanted democracy, majority of whom wanted their vote to be counted, the majority were willing to abide with the results. And it is this group of people that we have to honor, who showed that they could stay steadfast in great temptation to rebel, to react to what were glaring and repeated attempts to prevent the will of the Guyanese people being recognized and counted. And so for me, the anniversary is PPP. We won, our government is in, but it's also a vindication of how far we've come from 92 in building a democratic nation and a people that want democracy and want to keep it alive.
Thank you for that. I know Minister Indar and Minister Edghill, you both were on the ground throughout the elections, all of you. So you were there witnessing what was happening. So I would also ask for your recount of what was transpiring prior to the August 2 swearing in ceremony of His Excellency, Mr.
Well,
Minister Edghill.
thank you very much, moderator, and greetings to your viewers and listeners. Joining Madam Teixeira in studio this afternoon to talk about those days is a bittersweet experience in the sense that we talked about some of these things before March 2nd. Since the passage of the no confidence motion, the deliberate attempt to frustrate the will of the Guyanese people to reinterpret the constitution, and so when it came to March 2nd and we saw what was happening, it was not only fear, but one of the things that I can tell the nation, and sometimes people miss these very important things. The leadership of the People's Progressive Party and the People's Progressive Party C as a list must be congratulated by all Guyanese for their patience, fine, courageous leadership. We did not allow our support base to erupt into violence and protests and the destabilizing of the country. Managing your political base who labored and worked for an electoral victory, who had in their hands statements of poll, who saw the pasting up on the
Decisions.
of the statements of poll on the internet, the rulings of the CCJ, the shenanigans that was taking place at the Court of Appeal, managing emotions, tempers, and expectations by the leadership of the PPP and the list, the PPPC list, was something that Guyanese should recall. And in that, the outstanding stalwart leading that team was then General Secretary and opposition leader at the time, now Vice President, Dr. Edghill, and our presidential candidate, who is now President of Guyana, Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali. But you had people like Madam Gail Teixeira, the Executive Secretary of the party, the CC, the EXCO, many of us from the civic component, who had to manage that environment because we were at a brink, is what you call the 2 minutes to midnight. And then you have to turn the clock backwards, so it will become 11:30. So we could go back to the 2 minutes to midnight again, because we have been at 2 minutes to midnight several times during that process. But what is interesting, as I join my colleagues in this discussion, is that some of the players who led the front in frustrating and insulting the intelligence of the Guyanese people are now promoting themselves as if they should be chosen as leaders for the next government. And I guess we have to get a never again sign pasted. There are some things that must never happen again. Leaders must tell this nation, are you going to be prepared to work according to the rules, or are you going to be honest to accept the results, the will of the people in the ballot box? We must be able to have a never again sign that says, no GCOM chairman must be unilaterally appointed, because that is where the danger zone is. Just to remind everybody, if Patterson had remained there as GCOM chairman, no matter if the PPPC had gotten two-thirds of the majority of the votes, all he had to do is to make a declaration that was false. Granger would have been sworn in, and then we would have to go to the court by way of an election petition, and that would have taken forever. The plan was clear to rig these elections way before March 2nd and that 5-month period, and that is what Madam Teixeira was referring to. The plan to rig included the unilateral appointment, the unilateral, illegal, and unconstitutional appointment of the GCOM chair. And there was a mechanism that was being put in place there to rig those elections. So sitting here in August of 2024, Madam Teixeira, for us to have to sit and discuss this, we have to celebrate strong leadership that held this country together. The stakes were too high for leadership not to be there. And if there's anything that the Guyanese people should be able to judge, is the leadership that was provided by those who now form government, and the leadership that was provided by those who wanted to insult, cheat, destroy. You know, it is strange that a man will discuss 34 is the majority of 65 and now want to be the president of Guyana. That is the level of thinking. Is it some cultic brainwashing that they think exists in society, that people should forget those things? So opportunities like this should be more often presenting itself for us to educate Guyanese people. Don't just look at suits, look at track records, because they played a very important role. Those who fought those cases in court, lawyers who joined themselves to frustrate the will of the Guyanese people, are now coming out to say we could become the next government. So, listen, it was a hard fight to hold this country together. And from opposition, we had, all of us here, plus many others, had to take care of the welfare of a nation in the COVID period. While a government was busy seeking to rig and steal an election, the PPPC was keeping this nation at peace, at calm, making sure people get food, making sure people didn't die in a time of COVID, distributing masks. Many of our activists we were buying cloth, sewing masks, packaging them in plastic bags because we didn't have supplies at the hospital. And so, Madam Teixeira, perhaps sometime we have to discuss these things in more greater detail for people to understand. It was a lot that was happening, but we had to keep our eye on the price. Guyana must be a united country, and we got over the edge when President Ali was sworn in on August 2nd. We celebrate that. But while we celebrate that, we must never forget. I wanted to use a stronger term, but the occasion would not allow me to use that term. If I was preaching in church, I would have used that term. But for the purpose of public consumptions, we must never forget those who pamphlet themselves as genuine, as Democrats, as people who have Guyana's interests at heart. And then we recently had somebody who was actually going to justify, an elder who was going to justify the rigging because of how evil the PPP is. Yeah. It's cultic brainwashing to tell people wrong is right because of the evil that may exist. Can't go like that. So thank God we're in a safe place. Thank God Guyana is moving forward. Thank God we had great leaders. Thank God for the praying people of Guyana. And a lot of the praying people of Guyana failed Guyana during that time as well, because they were praying, but they were not prepared to speak the truth. And this is something, is an indictment against a lot of people who like to call for prayer and righteousness, that at a time when they should have spoken about what was wrong and make a difference, they decided to become silent. You can't be silent in the face of evil and be considered righteous. And that is, we have to be able to deal with that.
Minister Indar, we can hear from you now.
Well, first of all, Bruce, I think hour or 50 minutes of our time. I think that one day of the period between the 3rd of March, actually, it's from the 3rd of March all of these things that happened to the swearing in August. One day, the events of one day, I think an hour I might not be able to explain that. But what's critical, as I join my elder Gail Teixeira and Bishop Juan Edghill, what is clear is that when you're in opposition, you're up against a government. The government controls the entire state apparatus. The police, in some cases the army, the fire, special branch, all of the arms of government and the government resources. What does the common man in a community have within his arsenal of tools to see change? It's a single vote. One vote he has. That is his weapon to effect change. If a man thinks that the people that are currently in office do not deserve to govern me, he goes and he makes his ballot. If he thinks that they should, he goes and makes his ballot for them or against them. In that process, what we found is that 116,000 Guyanese when the CEO that at that time made it invalid. 116,000 votes. The rigging started in, as my two elders said, long before 2020 election. The machinery to do it was there. Did you know, as of December of 2019, 2 months or 2 months really before the election, international organizations were not accredited as yet? They were not. It's when the U.S. The Foreign Relations Committee came down here and went and meet with president, then those things to the machinery start to accredit people to come and do observership. So the rigging, I remember when it happened. March 2nd, I was at Comrade Irfan House. That was the control for Region 3. At that time, he was candidate Irfan. We were checking SOPs till 5 in the morning. I went home. By the time I get up the day and I'm going to do something, I got a call from one of my colleagues, Narayan Singh, who was in Ashman's building, saying, you need to come. Something looks wrong. It is 5 in the afternoon. When I go to the building in Ashman's building, Anil Nandalal was there. He said his shift changed, so I take over now because some of the accountants that I know were doing the tabulation in that building, and Mr. Mingo were saying that we're gonna count to the end. At 9 o'clock, I see two of the APNU people them bat out the hell out of the office. It was James Bonner and Michael Leonard. I was there. I saw it with my eye. So I went and asked Mingo. I said, Mingo, I thought you said to Anil Nadal, we continue to count. Man, I tired. Shut down the count. At 9 in the night. By the time that, word come. Golden Grove have protests. Everybody scattered. The next morning is when all of the mass and the sickness and the whole shenanigan of the world saw. Now, I go back to the first point. How does a person effect change against a government apparatus is with a vote. And what happened in that period is to usurp that process. That process was since in the beginning, when democracy was formed throughout the globe, where people use vote to choose their government and vote to remove their government. And if people say that you're no longer fit to hold office and govern me, that I need somebody different to govern me and give them a try, they have to respect the will, and the will was not respected. The will was not respected, and the machinery came into place to make every single excuse known to man to prolong them staying in office, to go to courts over and over, as we say in the countryside, to gote wandal. You know, you gote wandal, one case over and over into the court till they come up with the term res judicata, mean the matter has been tried and went to finality. You can't keep getting another man to come and try the same issue, and that is what they were doing, kept them so long into the courts. Thank God, young President Ali, 40 years old, came into office at that time. I think he just became 41 May, and he got into office, and you see the government that is working for the people. Breakneck speed, we work, we serve people. We have servant leadership mentality. We're on the ground all the time. And that is what we ask the people to give us a chance to do, and that is what we're doing.
Thank you for your contribution, Minister Indar. I would want us to get into the challenges that existed on assumption into office, but before we get there, some of the underlying things that were mentioned by all of you is what was unfolding during that 5-month period, the shenanigans, as we saw. There was the movement of the command center. There we went from bed sheet to spreadsheets. We saw different persons activated in the recount. The statements of polls were there, but yet spreadsheets had different figures. It was there for the world to see. And my next question has to do with our international image, investor confidence during that period of time. What was happening to the country? And had the APNU AFC succeeded in their efforts, where would Guyana have been a day like today? I'll start with you, Minister Teixeira.
I don't like to think about it. It's hard to think about it because I have faith in our people and I have faith in our desire for good and for a democratic nation. So I have a difficulty. I mean, clearly, everything was paused. in terms of investments, in terms of everybody was waiting. So Guyanese were waiting. Should I build my house? Should I not build my house? Should I bring in a car? Should I buy a car? What am I going to do? My visa application's in. Should I kind of pursue it? Everyone was waiting, and so too were investors. Let's watch what's going on in this space. And certainly the support that Guyana received from the UN, the OAS, the Commonwealth, the CARICOM countries focused attention on Guyana. And for the first time, we've experienced rigged elections from 1968, to 85. The war was not on our side until about slowly through the Carter Center in 91, 92, people were listening that this country didn't have a democratic tradition and elections were rigged. So the country was on hold, waiting. It was like you were suspended, waiting. And that's why the points that Bishop raised about managing our people, making sure that this country didn't descend into civil conflict, violence, and so on, was critical, because part of the Granger plan, part of the APNU AFC plan, was that they wanted to have violence. They tempted people to have violence. They created situations that should have had a retort, and it didn't happen, because the decision was by them. Have the reactions and spontaneous reactions of communities fighting, and becomes racial, police get involved, and then we'll declare emergency, a declaration of emergency. So you're under now state orders. So the whole election thing would be further convoluted. So it could have gone in many different directions. And so that's why I think, for me, that people are waiting. The August 2nd, the declaration, there was like the whole country breathed. And that's when later on people said, okay, let's see how this new government settled in, because there was also a view that even when we got in, there may be protest and violence. There wasn't in a level we couldn't manage. And so then we started really from first go, from August 2nd, plowing through at an enormous speed, which we've never reduced. There are people in the diplomatic corps to say to some of us, how are you guys doing this? Because the speed at which this government is going, the president himself, this has never happened in Guyana before. We've had great leaders of our country, the PPP and the PPC. But it is when, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not but when certain variables come into being at the same time, then the situation is one that is conducive. So this is the first time in our history that we have the coming together of different variables, factors that are in our favor. Over the years, we've had many, many challenges in government, under Jack Dew, under Ramatar, under Chetty, under Mrs. Jagan. This is the first time that the variables, our state of our economy, the global situation in terms of how Guyana is looked at, our image at the international level, the whole transformative agenda of Guyana and the mood of our people. Our people don't have time, I think, don't have time for all this divisive politics. There are some, obviously, that like it, but the majority of Guyanese people want to look at their lives, their families' lives, and what is the future. I can get a house lot. Can I get a job? Can I get a skill training? What is the future for my children? And so those issues are what we're working on delivering. And so the what could have happened, may have happened, I leave that to the political scientists of the future to be able to do that. But I think that having gone through what we went through, there was a lot of goodwill for Guyana after. Because at the OAS level and the UN level, any other country would have gone into major civil war. We've seen what's happening in Bangladesh recently, we've seen what's happening in Nigeria, we're seeing what's happening with our neighbor next door. So we could have gone that way, and worse. But we didn't. And again, you go back to leadership, management, political responsible leadership, and ability to have people trust that leadership, that it can bring us through the worst of the environment. So I think that it could have gone a different way, but it didn't. And there are factors of why it didn't, and we should honor those and make sure we retain those, that we don't lose that over the years coming up in the new evolving Guyana.
Minister Edghill, would you care to add to that?
You know, you were asking specifically about how were we viewed by the international community. That view was expressed in statements that came from responsible bodies, the OAS, the Commonwealth, the CARICOM. But just to remind Guyana, the then Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Karen Cummins, was threatening international observers to revoke their accreditation as observers to the election. Guyana saw former prime ministers who led delegations here standing up to her. We got the phrase being coined during that period of being a sanctimonious gangster, because you're pretending to be above board, pious, righteous, stickler for order, but your minions, your surrogates, and the people who are working for you to keep you there, they have the clearance, the instructions, and everything else to damage whatever needs to be damaged so that you could continue to remain sitting on that pedestal. David Granger did no favor to Guyana when he conceded. I want to repeat that in case anybody wants to carry that line, because there's so many opposition who actually wanted it. He did Guyana no favor, is that he could not have stayed any longer in that position of being a pretender. He was being called out by the international community. He was being called out by every decent, democratic leader and society about his actions. But we stood the chance of becoming a pirate state. And I recall the political leadership at that time in the PPPC, that is why I'm speaking about this very passionately. You would have heard Dr. Meyer Douglas, and the stakes are too high. Let's take it calm. Let's keep our people together. We're going to get through this. If there was one man who was confident that this will turn out right at the end, was him. Because I think he understood the body politic of what was playing. But in all fairness, it was during that 5-month period too. A lot of strong PNC, APNU, AFCites started jumping ship and abandoning. Because when the rig became so obvious and become so dangerous, some people started to either be quiet or disappear quietly into the twilight. But they had the core riggers. The core riggers. Listen, I sat as in the Recounting station. I was one of the persons for the PPPC that participated in the Recounting, and I dealt with Region 4, I guess. Some people in the PPP believe that I would have fared well in Region 4, which had the great problem. During the election period, I was in charge of Region 10, like I've been for the longest while. Region 10 had no issues with cheating and rigging. Their figures were fine and everything. Region 4 is where I had the problem. So I went into the stations. We had people like Kadaki Amsterdam. I am not disappointed or surprised with some of the things he says now in his program. I sat with him for 1 month, even though I didn't know the gentleman before. And he was so brainwashed that they had won the election, or he was living in a delusional environment. Somebody told him something. And I'm saying to him, we just counted the box. What does your statement of poll say? Look what mine said, and look what is up on the screen. And you can still be keeping lies? Yours told you that you have a number that we didn't find in the box. Mine said we have a number that is similar to what was just found in the box. Why would you continue You don't know, of course. You had all the insults that you're a sellout, you're a Judas, you're a this, all the racial epithets that went along with it. So I'm not disappointed when I see some of them pontificated on social media. That hurt. I don't know how they could survive in communities having gone out so far on a limb and did some of the things. But you know why they're still surviving? Because of the forgiving nature of the Guyanese people, and particularly those of us in the PPP. We didn't go after them with hate and bitterness and all the rest of it. We stick with the law, we stick with principle. It's disappointing that the case for those who have been charged has now been suspended for another month, and the Guyanese people are becoming impatient about that. I don't want to discuss the merits of the case, but I'm noticing that 30 days sick leave for the magistrate. That's where we are right now. That's when it's going to resume. But people knew. People knew. And I want to be very clear on this, because while Guyana is moving, and I'm proud to be part of a team that is making sure that Guyana's development and image internationally is properly preserved, we are leading. There could be no conversation around the world where climate security, energy security, and food security is discussed, where Guyana is not playing a leading role. Climate security, energy security, and food security. Guyana is playing a leading role around the world where that is concerned. But there are many still who reside in our society who make comments daily about the president, who make comments about the government. Why don't the Guyanese people put a letter to the newspaper and ask G.H.K. Lal, whoever he is, I don't know the gentleman, but he writes a lot, he criticizes the government. Where was your voice during the 5 months of rigging? Show us the letters and the commentary that you made that was against the rigging. Are you a rigger or not a rigger? We must ask people like Mike McComrack from the Guyana Human Rights Association, where was your voice during the 5 months of rigging? What were the statements you made to say this was wrong? We must also ask some of my evangelical and Pentecostal pastors, whose sermons could be very vibrant. Why were they silent? And why their sermons and their exhortations to the nation was absent during that time? We had to stand in that place and say, we'll get over this. And you know what? President Ali came to office as president. The first day he sworn, the senior members of our cabinet hit the road running, got the other members of his cabinet in place, and we didn't go to fight with anybody who didn't support us. We became a government for all the people of Guyana. So I can sit here 4 years after, and if anybody comes to me with a line about your government has discriminated against a community, I would laugh, because I have the evidence to show that we didn't govern based upon the ballot box. We governed based upon the fact that all Guyanese are deserving when it comes to house lot distribution, when it comes to communities where we would have done roads, when it comes to health care, when it comes to education, when it comes to the scholarship grants that were given out. The facts are there. We did not punish even our haters and our detractors. We came to office with humbled, and we saw ourselves as being servants, and we took the posture. We'll be humbled. We'll not use our office to abuse. We'll use our office to serve. And that is the success of the PPPC over the last 4 years. The servant approach to leadership. We're one of the most accessible governments. Ministers can be reached anywhere in the fields. You go to communities, they have seen tens of government services rolling out at the same time. Ministers are everywhere because we saw ourselves as servants and we continue to serve. But don't forget that a lot of people who want to pontificate now and be loud in the face of the rigging You don't judge a man about where he stands in the good times. Guyana is having good times now, so people are free to speak. Judge a man where he stood at the times when we were in adversity. And if you didn't have the moral fortitude and the ethical capability to lift yourself out of just personal gain and deal with a bigger picture, don't lecture us now. The PPP and the PPPC showed that it stood for ethics, morals, had values, valued Guyana above just the one for political power. We preserve this nation. So President Ali's One Guyana platform, people should appreciate, because like Comrade Teixeira is saying, if it had gone different, if we didn't provide a responsible political leadership, but we were a laughing stock in CARICOM. I recall when the heads of government came here, we attended those meetings with General Secretary Jack Dio and presidential candidate Air Finale, the long nights at the CARICOM headquarters, and you had a sanctimonious gangster who's believing that he could just gaff this thing away. When we had, and I say this without fear of contradiction, you could remember that the recount, they challenged the recount, that they agreed to, and one of the things that they were actually doing was playing to the ethnicity of members of the recount because of the countries that they came for. They were looking for ethnic solidarity among the people. We remained calm, professional, and put the results out there. So Guyana is in better hands. The PPP is not perfect, you know, but I always tell people they're good for Guyana. They're good for Guyana.
Minister Indar, before I have your contributions to the same question, I wanted to add, because you have had a vast experience with the private sector. So at that time, you also had a pulse there, or an in-ear of what the conversations were like in the various private sector bodies. So can you add as well how the private sector in Guyana was feeling during that time?
Well, it's really good that you're doing this program, because in politics, especially in Guyana, politicians, especially on the other side, the AP and UAFC faction and the rest of them, they rely on the memory, the short memory that we have as a people. They rely on it. They use it as a tool. They think we have goldfish memory. By the time we flip up and flip down, we forget what happened. But it's good that you're doing this show to remind people. Let me give you a view that Comrade Gale did not want to go into. Because I wrote an article that made the front page of the Teixeira News at the time, that if Guyana becomes a pariah state, what are some of the effects of it? So when you have an undemocratic government in office, the international community, those countries who hold the title of, defenders of democracy, the larger countries, they normally sanction governments, individuals and governments. They normally do this through strangulation of the financial system, which is the SWIFT system that banks use to move money back and forth. In the private sector, we are manufacturers. Most of our goods that we consume are imported. They're billed in US currency. How you paying for that goods? If you don't have correspondent banks, can't go through countries like the United States or in the UK and so. How do you pay for those things? You can't. And that is where strangulation happened. So our people must understand that the economic fallout that comes from undemocratic rule is unthinkable. It happens to some other countries right now in the world that are cut off from the global financial system. So if you have a manufacturing plant and something goes down, you can't buy the part because you can't get the money to pay the supplier who is in another country that had to go through the SWIFT system to get the money to send you the part. If your trucks are down, you can't get the part because you have to buy it from overseas. If you need raw material that we don't produce, you have to buy it from overseas. All of these things are billed or invoiced to Guyanese businesses in US currency. So they must have a US corresponding bank so that the money can be paid and your items can come. Just imagine that is shut down. What happens to production, livelihood, importation, consumption, the needs that you would normally have? You just fathom that. So when sanctions come They come with that kind of regime in place. And that hurts the private sector. The private sector was very up in arms. I can tell you the private sector commission, the Chamber of Commerce, manufacturers, AmCham, you name it. They were, and a lot of them were observers. They saw with their very eyes what was happening. They had accreditation to observe. After many fights, obviously, then they got it. Many meetings with GCOM officials, then they got it. But that part of it is the horror story of what could have happened to us. And nobody wants to invest in a country that has that kind of restrictions on movement of money, movement of capital, bringing in capital, taking out capital, operation. Nobody wants to be. So when Comrade Gale talked about people were hesitant and looking, it was a great fear in the private sector. A great fear. Nobody was investing. In fact, what was happening is that persons thought that Mr. Granger would have stayed in government because every time he was preparing to be sworn in, preparing to be sworn in, people were moving their money out of the country. So there was a hollowing out of the country's foreign reserve. There was a hollowing out of it because people who had money say, if my money is left here, and I can't get it, how am I going to get it out? You can't get it out after if you cut off in the financial system. What are you going to do? Take it in Guyanese dollars? The minute you, in a sanctioned environment, currency valuations start to move in negative territory. So business people, Guyanese people, they're not stupid. They know, and a lot of folks start taking out the money. We saw it. We saw the numbers too. So that brings me back to the other side of what Bishop Edghill was telling you about the folks when the time was in the history of our country since the dawn of the republic when persons had an opportunity to say this thing is wrong, let the results of the people be posted online because they say they want they had the SOPs. Post your SOPs, give up the election because you know you damn well lose it. A lot of people who nowadays have the loudest voices, the loudest, most consistent voice and negative comments toward the current government, the silence was deafening. I can tell you mentioned some of the names, but there's a long list of them. It was deafening. Now, that is their cross to carry. The media should put them, every time they come with this righteous, holier than thou position, how they know better and they've done better and they could have do better, coulda, woulda, shoulda, but you didn't say when the time was appropriate that rigging is happening, you all stepped down from it. It stayed absent. And that is their cross to carry, Bishop. That is their cross.
But did you remember the big tent in front of the
misinformation test,
Otachong Conference Center where the recount was going on?
Yeah.
Do you remember that some of those same people are now sitting in Parliament as members of Parliament representing people? Do you recall the narratives that they were spinning out there? How could they be trusted? One of the things about leadership is you got to trust people. You got to trust people.
But the image that Bishop was talking about earlier didn't just arrive back, you know.
You have to work on it.
We have to work it because we have destroyed a lot of those folks were cussing out the regional leaders. They were cussing out international observers. They were destroying Guyana, chopping our legs off our feet when it comes to our repetition. It had to be built back. President Ali did that building back. He went out there, met with people, rebuild back in that relationship with our partners, regional and global partners. So it didn't just happen back just because you had a new government. You had to work back at it. Everybody was accused. The minute you spoke out against, at the time, Granger and the AP and UFC, you were an enemy of the apparatus that they put in place to cost people day and night.
Thank you. I want us to look now. I know it is a lot to unpack, and Minister Indar did hint that we won't have enough time to go into everything, but specifically the challenges that were met when the PPPC assumed office there in 2020. Quite coincidentally, we had you, Minister Edghill, presenting the first emergency budget to the National Assembly to get the economy back on track. Can we talk a little bit about some of the interventions, some of the things or challenges that had to be fixed by the Irfan Ali-led PPPC government?
We had to take our feet off the neck of the Guyanese people. You remember that term of art. We had to take our feet off the neck of the Guyanese people. We had to give people hope. So that emergency budget, one of the first things we did, you go back to it, the measures, the 200 plus items that we told the people while in opposition that we were against, we revoked them immediately. The charges, the D&I charges to the farmers, take VAT off of the things that they had imposed VAT on. Remember, you had VAT on data, VAT on water, VAT on electricity, and every time you hear the word VAT, it's the government pushing their hands deeper into the pockets of the Guyanese people. And what we did, rather than you pushing your hand in the Guyanese people's pocket, we offer the Guyanese people an opportunity to make money, and then you pay your taxes, as against taxing, fines, fees. Remember, we had those debates and all the rest of it. But also, the budget had to deal with the COVID situation and the COVID measures, bringing hope to families. I was talking about this the other day. Remember when school was closed? We had 3,000 or more small businesses that were closed as well. Those ecosystems around the schools who sell the canteens, all the young people who were doing their fish and chips and their barbecue and the vending in the villages shut. We had to be able to bring support to those people, get them back on their feet, and get their businesses going. That's why we tell people over and over, the PPPC, in any intervention we make, we don't stop economic activity. We bring order, we bring support. So whenever we see people jumping up about they getting moved, it's not people stopping. We encourage economic activity, and we cut the lawlessness. So we had to deal with taking the foot off of the Guyanese people, give people a chance to breathe. We had to deal with measures to stimulate the private sector. And those were things that we had to do. We reopened the airport. We were the first in the Caribbean to reopen our airport. We had to get projects going again so that people could be meaningfully employed and engaged. We had to address the issues of what was happening in the forestry sector, the gold sector, because jobs were lost because of the measures that were placed in those sectors. What was the name of the tax that they had? Tributous tax.
The tributous tax.
Tributous tax. And then they wanted owners and managers of operations to get what is called withholding tax. They were making people agents of GRA, and it was real confusion. We had to regularize all of those entities to make the society breathe and to make sure we get a jump start. So we had to start creating employment by ensuring we push forward with the projects. We had to deal with the smaller people who were suffering because their income was not there. Remember, we went house to house and delivered COVID grants. I notice now the opposition is hurting over our ability to deliver those grants under the scrutiny of the Auditor General's office. So they are worried about those things. We had to get businesses going, preserve the health. You know, some of these things are painful. COVID, and we had a COVID hospital that did not have a line for oxygen, didn't have a bed. We had a shell that was open by then President Granger. When we got here, we had to fix that COVID hospital. We had to stop people from dying by being able to develop our capacity. And remember, President Ali went out there and got the vaccines. And we had people who were telling us that don't take this vaccine because this one is bad, this one will kill you. And some of them are even preparing communities to reject the vaccines. But that budget catered for the first stim. Let people breathe. Let we inspire hope. Let things start flowing as normal. Remove that. Give people an opportunity to start going again and provide the support to ensure that we can give. And after that, it was just the country has taken off.
Mind you, that budget was prepared and tabled within 1 month. 21 days of preparation, and then we took it. So it was an emergency budget. It was night and day work. Right? I was part of the team with your vice president and Bishop to help with budget direct and everybody. It was literally
Breakneck speed
to get it finished and put there.
We have just about 5 minutes remaining for this.
We dedicate that to
interview.
Madam Teixeira.
I want us to reflect or ask all of you in a brief way, how can we ensure this never happens again? And Guyana into the future, where we are heading now, 4 years on of the Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali-led government, how are we performing? Where is Guyana headed as it relates to governance? We could start with you, Minister Indar, and make our way down.
So, Guyana, in terms of where it's heading, it's for the younger generation. It's in a territory where we were never seen it before. Economic growth moving double digits, 6 to 2.5%. On that, you have 33%. On that, you're projecting another 34% this year. Economic growth is really called an economic explosion. With that, you have all of the issues that surround it, which is maintaining strong governance institutions like GCOM, like the Integrity Commission, like the ERC, all these constitutional commission, all of them functioning, making sure that people are educated in a way that they know the value and the power of their vote, and make sure that they stand by it as well, like they did in 2020, where people really, it was a really hard time for people. I can tell you, talk to folks on the ground. So you don't want to put back Guyana through that trauma. As Bishop said, never again. You don't want your country to be fractured like that. It makes it more difficult to govern when a society is fractured. That is why we have to make sure that we stamp out this kind of, partisan, racial kind of thing, that everything you look through the eyes of racism. And so, if you do that, the country would not get the true legs that it need to run the distance that you could run. And we are in competition. Guyana is in competition with neighbors for investment. We're in competition with other people to bring new money into Guyana. So we, as a country, are in competition for investment too. You want inward investment to grow your country, to better the livelihood standards of your country. So we have to work hard and make sure that that doesn't ever happen again. And we have to educate our people too, because we cannot be gullible as we were in 2020 to believe a lie without evidence. Up to this day, the last time I saw the statement of polls is when everybody left the building. Me and two other persons were in the room where they were counting, and in the corner, I was standing going out the door when the lady come and said, pick up your garbage and get out. I was one of the guys there. I was there, or two other people. The statement of polls were on a desk in the corner. That's the last time I saw it with my eyes. That the GCOM statement of it was in the corner. They had people watching it, but it was there. That's the last time. So people must trust but verify. If somebody says something to you, okay, well, you're saying this. This is not just like, there were cartoon and milk in the fridge, but it's no longer there. It's not a small thing. This is a national thing to win a government. It's a big thing. If somebody makes a claim that they win an election, show me the evidence that you win it. And the institution of, transparency and verification must take effect. And we have to make sure that our people understand that not, some man sit down and decide that your vote is invalid and you take that. We have to be stronger and take a more unitary approach to how Guyana will outlive everybody. This land will outlive everybody. We will come and we'll go, but the land remains. The country remains. So we got to make sure that we have that unity moving forward.
Minister Edghill, your closing.
People that are not learning from the past is bound to make the same mistake again. And the only way we could prevent this is by teaching principles and using the real life illustrations for our younger people to say, I got 4 kids. They saw, they heard, they listened. That young age group, they saw. People had no appreciation when we told them of 28 years of dictatorship. As a matter of fact, some people were anxious to stop talking about that. All right, we did. You could stop those young people from talking about what they saw. But we have to educate our people. And the big challenge here is that Guyanese must learn to interrogate their leaders and make sure that you're not deceived by a suit or a silk tie. We've had that before. Not everybody who kneels in a church clasping hands in prayer is doing it to God. Some of it is to the photograph. We must ensure people's hearts are in the right place, and we must ask the tough questions. And I'm saying this across the board. We must ask the tough questions. If not, we could end up with dictators. We could end up with people who are concerned more about themselves and their image and not the people. But Guyana is maturing, and I have the confidence that that political conversation will help us to never get back to where we were.
Mr. Teixeira.
How do we try to ensure that the events of 2020 don't happen again, or the threats to our democracy in other forms? A number of things that we did and are doing are means to which we can try to reduce or prevent that from happening. Strong institutions, which is what my friend and colleague, your dad, spoke about. Memory, institutional memory of what transpired, historical context. And there also so you have the constitutional framework, which I still believe Guyana's constitutional framework is a progressive one. And we will be starting a constitutional reform process that will take a year or two, goodness knows, but the people will decide that. The electoral laws, we went back, we had consultations to try to remove the ambiguity in the ROPA and in the Registration Act, to try to prevent such aberrations and abominations like what happened in 2020. But the other part is how do we run our country? One of the things we keep repeating over and over again as a government: inclusion, participation, transparency, and accountability. These issues. And delivery of services. Pro-poor, pro-growth. The whole issue of the climate change and low carbon development strategy is based on a sophisticated process of a diversified economy that will preserve and protect our ecosystem, but at least, and also benefit from it. So we're not living in exotica and quixotica, which is what many people say, don't touch the oil, don't touch the trees. So how do we develop? When we say, no, we manage our resources. We have managed our forestry well. That we are one of the lowest deforestation rates in the world, at 0.06%. We also will be dealing with oil and gas and other things that come up. But the fact is that the preservation of democracy is when people feel the ministers come and have a community meeting, we tell them about the road. And they're told this will be fixed next month, next 6 months, next year budget. And they see it happen. The access to services, you go to a health center, you go to a hospital, there are drugs there. I want to remind people in the 5 years of Granger, parts of this interior didn't have basic drugs, did not have basic essential drugs. And that's why they got this, their pants were caught down on the COVID one. Because the issues of COVID didn't begin in March with the first case in Guyana. It started months before, in which countries were watching a new phenomenon taking place, particularly in China. So that the role of government to, one, have a policy, as we do, pro-poor, pro-growth, a national agenda that is supported by the parliament, a parliament that, whether the opposition likes it or not, has not gone into what you call excesses and undermining parliamentary democracy. Parliamentary democracy is there. It's how they use it. You see, one thing about the PVP we learned in 28 years in opposition, and we're the only political party, I think, in the world that came out of opposition for 28 years and came back stronger. Most opposition parties, if you're in that long time, you're no longer relevant.
You disappear.
You disappear, and so one thing we learned in those 28 years, to be a damn good opposition. And so when we got into the opposition, we said we were putting fire to their feet, and we did it, and we did it well. And we exposed. That's the role of the opposition. And that is part of the checks and balances on a government that must be there. You're telling me this opposition does their work well? No. We do our work better in government, too. So the issue of how do we try to ensure, one cannot, I believe, predict. I'm not a Farsi to say, these things can and cannot happen. But in politics, yes. And if you've been in politics long enough, there are a number of what are the worst possible things that happen, the middle ones and the least ones that can come at you. And so you have exogenous issues that we can't predict, but we know they're there. Price of gold, price of oil. If it goes up and down, what will be the impact on the Guyanese economy, on the cost of living? Disasters. That is a normal now part of our description as a country, and many countries of the world. We now have to deal with disasters. Is it floods for Guyana? Is it fires? And so those are things we can't predict, but we know that can impact, can make a country have difficulties. People are not being able to live the way they did before. Things have got harder that are not the cause of the government, but a cause of other factors. That will be the challenge for us, and to be able to make it and manage it well. And what we did in coming into government, recognizing with the 250 taxes, the cost of living, was to try to immediately bring relief in a variety of ways. People complain about the cost of living, but if you look in the United States and other countries where the cost of living is still high, where there are now documents and write-ups that Americans are no longer having their Sunday roast supper. They're cutting down on going to Starbucks. They're cutting down on going to the fast food places because the money isn't stretching. So cost of living has post-COVID, all the other factors impact on all of us. But no one can say about us that we have not brought efforts and measures to cushion the impact on the Guyanese people. And so these are all factors, though, Bruce, that could lead to a situation where there might be attempts to reverse or to opportunistically create a situation to reverse. And I think that whole issue of engaging with people, educating people, informing people, that they know what's going on, that they understand what's going on, are critical components of democracy and preserving democracy. People having a sense of where they came from, what we've gone through, all important. The importance of our access to services, delivery of services. Although we're doing so well in so many areas, you still have somebody at a health center who will say, treat them offhandedly, that will hurt someone's feelings. That, they read all the thing you can get in the eye care thing and the cervix thing and the tablets and stuff. And then somebody at a health center is rude to them. Or just says, you better come back. Or we ain't got the drug, come back, go so. Or you go to government agencies and there's someone coming from a faraway area. You gotta come back tomorrow, That undermines government. But that's not government policy. And that is what the kind of things as a government we have to constantly be addressing to ensure that when we say access to services, inclusion and participation, that people are not hearing ministers and presidents speak, but then when they get down to the brass tacks, they're then told, they get a different picture. Those are things that undermine and can lead to doubt and whether um, you're really serious. But clearly, the last 4 years have been unbelievable in this country. And if there are honest historians and political scientists, not many unfortunately, that really could write academically in what this country has changed. I'm not taking anybody back to the 70s. I'm not taking people back to the 50s. I'm taking people back to 2020. What had become this country under 5 years of Granger? I mean, we saw what it had when they had 28 years of government, what they did to our country by 92. Just 5 years. They reversed all the things that had been happening up to 2015. This country reversed so quickly, it's kind of scary. And so 2020 to now, what we have done, the architecture, you go down any street, you go into any housing scheme, you go into any community road, you go into any farming area, you go new schools, new nursery schools, health centers, hospitals. This country is on a trajectory that is unbelievable. It's phenomenal. And only those who are poor losers or who really don't love Guyana and to see our nation go forward are sitting there quibbling about whether you use the right asphalt or the wrong concrete or the wrong thing on some road. These are technical issues. So I think that those are ways we can preserve and ensure the democracy prevails. Because once people are involved in decision making, even at the community level, they become much more knowledgeable and aware and become your citizen observers. They can say to ministers, hey, the contractor not doing good work there or whatever. And so these are all part of building stepping stones to building a truly democratic nation, and one built on constitutional rule of law, which is what we have been saying. The judiciary playing its role, the legislature playing its role, the executive. And so, and also all the other checks and balances that our Constitution has to protect us. And so that I think, we're on a good wicket, on a very, very good wicket. And we just got to keep going. Keep up the pace, keep up the speed, keep up the consultation, although sometimes all of us get a little bit tired now and again, except our president, who seems to have resources that of energy we can't fathom out. But my colleagues in the cabinet, it's a very good team that works with the president, that supports the president. And it's an excellent team that we have, and they work hard, and they give their all, and they're loyal to our country, loyal to our people, loyal to our president. And I don't think we could ask for better. But we also need to keep building and building. We can't stop and we can't slow down. We don't have a choice. And so by the 5th anniversary, again, more hotels, more roads, more highways, more housing schemes, more jobs, more skills training. This country, which is something we talked about, in the 2000, when we were heavily in debt, 92 was that, when some of our leaders, Chetty Jagan and so, talked about Guyana could be a model country for the region, for democracy based on a pro-poor, pro-growth agenda, and to really put this country on the map. Everyone said, yeah, right. How are you going to do that? When is that going to happen? You don't even have the money. Well, I think 30 years later, we bring it into being.
Thank you so much, Minister Teixeira and Indar, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here as we continue to discuss the successes of the 4th year anniversary of the Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali-led government as democracy prevailed on August 2, 2020. And thank you to you, our listeners and viewers of this program. I'm Travis Bruce. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Prosperity for all, celebrating the 4th anniversary of the PPPC's government.